The night was still, almost too still. Sarah stood by her living room window, the glow from the streetlight spilling across her front yard. Then she saw it. 2 figures walking slowly toward her house. They weren't strangers. She knew their faces well. Mr. Collins, the HOA president, and another board member, Mrs. Dean. They were holding flashlights, whispering, taking pictures of her yard. Her stomach twisted. This was the 3rd time this week. The last time they said her mailbox was non-compliant. Before that, her garden lights were unauthorized. Now she didn't even know what they were after. Sarah quietly reached for her phone and started recording through the blinds. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but anger. She had moved into this neighborhood for peace, not war. But ever since she refused to donate to the HOA's mysterious beautification fund, the trouble had started. First came the warnings, then the fines, then the late-night visits. Every letter they sent looked more threatening than the last. Each one carried the same cold message: comply or face legal action. Sarah had tried to reason with them. She attended meetings, asked questions, and followed every rule in the handbook. But no matter what she did, they found new ways to accuse her of something. Tonight, though, was different. The way Mr. Collins shined his flashlight along her fence, it wasn't about violations. It looked like he was measuring her property line. That's when she realized they weren't just trying to scare her. They were planning something. Her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, had warned her weeks ago. "They do this," she whispered once at the mailbox. "They push people until they give up their homes. Happened to the Smiths 2 streets over." Sarah didn't want to believe it then. But now, watching them trespass in the dark, she knew Mrs. Harper was right. HOA wanted her gone. Her phone buzzed. A new message appeared. Another HOA email. Subject: urgent notice of non-compliance. The timestamp was 11:02 p.m. They were sending her violations while standing in her yard. Her pulse raced. The camera in her hand captured every second. Mr. Collins turned toward her house for a moment, his flashlight sweeping across the window. Sarah ducked. When she looked again, they were gone, vanishing into the night like shadows. She stood there for a long moment, her breath shaking. Part of her wanted to cry. Another part, the stronger one, wanted justice. She replayed the video. Clear faces, clear proof. They had crossed the line, literally. That night, Sarah made a choice. No more silence, no more fear. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one, but not the kind they expected. She started a folder on her computer called HOA Evidence. Inside it, she saved every message, every photo, every fine. And when she was done, she looked out the window again. Same quiet street, same perfect houses, same hidden corruption. The HOA thought she'd stay quiet. They were about to regret that mistake. A few months before that night, everything had seemed perfect. Sarah had just moved into the neighborhood. A quiet, clean community, surrounded by tall trees and smiling faces. At least, that's what it looked like at first. The HOA welcomed her with a bright smile and a packet full of rules. Mr. Collins himself had shaken her hand, saying, "We take pride in keeping things orderly here." At the time, she didn't notice the way he said it, like a warning wrapped in politeness. The first letter came 2 weeks later. Subject: notice of violation, garden lights. Apparently her soft white solar lights did not meet community standards. She rechecked the handbook. There was no rule about light color. Still, she removed them, thinking it was a simple mistake. But a few days later, another fine appeared. This time it was for her improper fence shade. The fence had been there long before she moved in, The previous owner never had an issue. Sarah emailed the HOA office. No reply. She called. No one answered. So she went in person. The secretary smiled politely, but avoided eye contact. "Mr. Collins isn't available," she said. "We'll get back to you." They never did. At first, Sarah tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a paperwork error. Maybe someone filed the wrong lot number. But then her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, pulled her aside one morning. "You're getting letters already?" she asked softly. Sarah nodded. Mrs. Harper lowered her voice. "Be careful. Once they start, it doesn't stop. If they see you question them, they make it worse." Sarah frowned. "Worse how?" Mrs. Harper looked around before whispering, "They'll find reasons. Fines, inspections, even threats. It's their way of control." Sarah didn't want to believe her. But within a week, the harassment grew. Letters started arriving almost daily, each with a new accusation. Trash bins visible for more than 10 minutes. Unapproved potted plants. Mail slot not uniform. Every single one came with a fine attached. She began to notice other things too. Cars slowing down in front of her house. HOA members standing at the end of her driveway, pretending to check something on their clipboards. And then, the whispers. Small talk that stopped when she walked by. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. She remembered the meeting where it all changed. During her first HOA gathering, Sarah had asked where the beautification fund money was going. The room went silent. Mr. Collins smiled too wide. "All funds are used appropriately," he said, his tone sharp. "You'll understand once you've lived here longer." After that day, the letters never stopped. Sarah's calmness began to fade. Every envelope in her mailbox made her chest tighten. Her home, her peaceful dream, was starting to feel like a cage. Still, she refused to give in. She wrote down every detail, every fine, every date. And late one night, as she sat surrounded by piles of paperwork, she noticed a pattern. All her supposed violations began right after that meeting. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules. They were punishing her. And Sarah decided, if they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. But this time she wouldn't play by their rules. Sarah couldn't sleep anymore. Each night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what the HOA really wanted from her. No one could be this obsessed with garden lights or fences. There had to be a reason. One morning, she finally decided to find out. She began by talking to her neighbors, the ones who had lived there for years. Most were too afraid to say anything. Some even pretended they didn't know what she was talking about. But one man, Mr. Harris from 2 streets over, sighed and told her everything. He said Mr. Collins, the HOA president, had been trying to upgrade the neighborhood for years. Behind those fancy words was something darker. Control. He wanted every property to match his idea of perfection, and anyone who didn't obey was pushed out. Mr. Harris lowered his voice. "Last year, the Smith family got hit with endless violations," he said. "They sold their house after 6 months. Guess who bought it cheap? Mr. Collins's brother." Sarah's heart sank. So that's what this was. A setup. A pattern. She went home and began searching public records online. What she found made her hands tremble. 3 houses on her street had recently changed owners. Each sale went through at suspiciously low prices, and each property was now owned by someone connected to the HOA board. Her lot was next in line. She opened the community development plans on the HOA website. Buried deep in the documents, she found a proposal labeled Private Access Extension. The line ran right through her backyard. Her house stood exactly where Mr. Collins wanted to build his private driveway, Now it all made sense. The letters, the fines, the late-night photos. He wasn't enforcing rules. He was trying to make her miserable enough to leave. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the glow of her laptop lighting her face. For the first time, anger gave way to purpose. If he thought she'd walk away quietly, he was about to regret it. She started printing every file, screenshotting every record, and highlighting every suspicious connection. The deeper she looked, the more corruption she found. Funds missing, rules bent, and board members rewarding themselves with maintenance bonuses. But there was one document she couldn't access. The HOA's internal meeting notes. They were locked behind a password-protected folder. That's when she decided to visit the office again. This time, she didn't go as a polite resident. She went as someone ready to expose them. When she entered the small office, the clerk looked up nervously. "I just need to see the meeting notes," Sarah said firmly. "Homeowners have a right to review them." The woman hesitated. Then, without saying a word, she slid a thin stack of papers across the desk. Sarah flipped through and froze. There it was, her name. Written next to the line, "Property slated for compliance reassessment and potential acquisition." Her stomach dropped. They had actually written it down. They were planning to take her property. She walked out of the office with shaking hands, holding the papers close. Her heart was racing. Part fear, part victory. Now she had proof. As she drove home, one thought burned in her mind. They thought she wouldn't find out. They thought she'd stay quiet. But Sarah was done being their victim. This was the beginning of her fight, and she wasn't backing down. Sarah knew she couldn't fight them with anger alone. She needed proof, real proof, something they couldn't twist, deny, or destroy. That night, she cleared her dining table and laid everything out. Letters, fines, screenshots, photos, and the papers she took from the HOA office. Each one told a small piece of the story, but together they showed a pattern: lies, harassment, and manipulation. She started recording everything. Every phone call, every visit, every email. If the HOA wanted to play games, she would play smarter. She bought small security cameras and placed them near her front porch, along her fence, and in her backyard. At first, she thought she was being paranoid. But just 2 nights later, her cameras caught something that made her blood run cold. It was Mr. Collins again, this time with 2 other board members. They were walking along her property line, whispering and pointing. At one point, one of them pulled out a measuring tape. They were trespassing in the middle of the night. Sarah watched the footage again and again. It was clear as daylight. They had crossed into her yard and didn't even try to hide it. The next morning, she printed the images and placed them neatly into a folder labeled Evidence. She added timestamps, dates, and descriptions. She was building her case, piece by piece. Still, she knew she couldn't rush. If she confronted them too soon, they'd cover their tracks. She had to wait for the right moment. So she stayed quiet. She let them think they were winning. The letters kept coming, each more threatening than the last. Immediate removal required. Legal action pending. Final warning before penalties increase. She paid nothing, replied to nothing, just kept recording. Meanwhile, she began reaching out quietly to her neighbors. One by one, people started talking. Each had their own story: unfair fines, IG, no-read complaints, and unexplained fees. The pattern was everywhere. Then, one afternoon, she got a message from Mrs. Harper. "You need to see this," it read. Attached was a photo. Mr. Collins meeting with a construction company near the back entrance of the community. The area marked Future Private Access. Sarah's heart pounded. The driveway plan wasn't just a rumor, it was already in motion, and she was the last obstacle standing in the way. That night, she sat on her porch, watching the quiet street as her camera lights blinked softly. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. When the next HOA meeting came, she'd walk in not as their target, but as their biggest problem. Because now, she had everything she needed. The footage, the papers, the truth. And soon, the whole neighborhood would see exactly what kind of people ran their HOA. The next HOA meeting was held on a warm Friday evening inside the community hall. Every seat was taken. The air buzzed with tension. People whispered, shifting nervously as the board members took their places. Sarah sat near the back, a small folder resting on her lap. Her heart was racing, but her face stayed calm. For weeks, she had waited for this moment, and tonight, she wasn't leaving quietly. Mr. Collins cleared his throat and began, "Before we start, I'd like to address several ongoing violations." His eyes flicked towards Sarah, including a serious case of non-compliance that continues to disrupt our community standards. Murmurs rippled through the room. Sarah stood up slowly. "Are you talking about me, Mr. Collins?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. He forced a smile. "Mrs. Turner, this isn't personal. It's simply procedure." Sarah took a deep breath, stepped forward, and placed her laptop on the table. "Then let's make it official," she said, pressing play. The screen lit up. Gasps filled the room as the video showed Mr. Collins and two board members trespassing into her yard at night, flashlights in hand, measuring tape across her fence. "Is this procedure too?" she asked. Silence. Mr. Collins' face turned red. "This is taken out of context," he stammered. But Sarah wasn't done. She pulled out printed documents, the meeting notes, the property plans, and the list of homes that had been quietly transferred to people tied to the HOA board. "I found your beautification fund," she said. "Except it's not for the community, is it? It's for you." The crowd erupted in whispers. One homeowner stood up. "You said my extra fees went to landscaping." Another shouted, "We want answers." The board members exchanged panicked glances. Mr. Collins slammed his hand on the table. "This is a misunderstanding." But Sarah was ready for him. She held up the last paper, the internal note mentioning her property as a target for acquisition. "You wanted my house," she said quietly. "That's what this was all about." Every person in the room turned toward Mr. Collins. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Mr. Collins tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what you're accusing me of?" "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "And now everyone else does too." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, people started clapping. It began as a soft sound, then louder, stronger, until the whole hall was echoing with applause. Sarah stood there, calm and steady, as Mr. Collins and his board sat frozen. They had been exposed in front of everyone. For months, they thought she'd stay quiet. But tonight she had turned the tables, and the war that started with one fake fine had just turned into a revolution. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was talking. Sarah's video from the meeting had spread like wildfire. Someone had recorded the confrontation and shared it in the local group chat. Within hours, everyone had seen it. The calm, perfect image of the HOA was gone. People were angry. People were awake. For years, homeowners had been afraid to speak up, afraid of fines, warnings, or retaliation. But now, with Sarah's proof, they finally saw what was really happening behind those community improvement letters. Neighbors began coming to her house one by one. Some brought their own letters and fines. Others just wanted to thank her for standing up. Every story was the same: lies, unfair charges, and intimidation. Sarah organized everything into folders, labeling each with a neighbor's name. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins tried to fight back. He sent out a long email calling her a troublemaker, spreading false information. But that only made things worse. One resident replied to all, attaching a copy of Sarah's video. Another added proof of missing HOA funds. Within minutes, the inbox was flooded with complaints and demands for answers. The next HOA board meeting was packed, not with quiet listeners, but with furious homeowners holding copies of their fines. People who had stayed silent for years now stood shoulder to shoulder, demanding truth. Mr. Collins tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by questions. Where did our money go? Why are houses being sold below value? Why did you target Sarah? He had no answers, only excuses. But Sarah wasn't interested in excuses anymore. She had already taken things further. She had sent all her evidence, the video, the documents, and the financial records, to the local news station. And that evening, when the 6 p.m. report aired, everyone saw. The headline read, HOA under fire for corruption and property abuse. Footage of Mr. Collins trespassing filled the screen. The reporter's voice was calm, but every word hit hard. Residents claimed they were targeted, fined, and harassed to force them out of their homes. The HOA tried to threaten a lawsuit against Sarah, but it backfired instantly. Her lawyer stepped in with counterclaims, backed by solid evidence of harassment and property interference. The neighborhood that once lived in fear was now united. Signs appeared on lawns reading, "We stand with Sarah." For the first time in years, the power had shifted. The HOA's control was cracking, and everyone could see it. As Sarah watched the news segment that night, she felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Her fight, which started with a single unfair letter, had turned into something much bigger. The truth was finally out. And though she knew the battle wasn't over, she also knew one thing for sure. The HOA's silence would no longer hide their corruption. Weeks later, the neighborhood was no longer the same. The once feared HOA meetings were quiet now. No shouting, no power games, no fake smiles. The storm had passed, and its wreckage was clear for everyone to see. Mr. Collins resigned in disgrace. The man who once ruled the board with arrogance now avoided eye contact. His name whispered like a warning. The investigation revealed everything: missing funds, secret votes, and backroom deals. The corrupt board members were voted out one by one. Their empty chairs at the long table were a symbol of the end of their control. For the first time in years, people clapped, not out of fear, but out of hope. A new HOA leadership took over. Neighbors who actually listened, smiled, and cared. They promised fairness and transparency, and this time, they meant it. Sarah's fines were erased. Every violation she had ever been accused of vanished like it never existed. She even received compensation for the damage to her property, something she never thought she'd see happen. The neighborhood felt lighter. People began greeting one another again, fixing fences together, sharing stories about the old board with a laugh instead of fear. It was as if the community had finally remembered what it meant to be neighbors, not prisoners of their own HOA. Sarah sat on her porch one evening, the same spot where everything began. Her garden, once the target of the board's greed, was now full of color again, bright flowers, and a small path that led nowhere but peace. She watched kids ride their bikes down the street and smiled. Mrs. Harper waved from across the road, holding her cup of tea. Sarah waved back, a quiet satisfaction warming her heart. She had never wanted power, only fairness. But she had learned something powerful. When one voice refuses to be silenced, others find their courage too. The HOA had underestimated her, and it had cost them everything. Now, Instead of fear, her name carried respect. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Sarah leaned back, feeling the cool air brush against her face. For the first time in months, she felt peace. Real peace. Her phone buzzed with a new message from a neighbor. "Thank you for standing up. We all needed someone brave enough to start it." Sarah smiled softly and put the phone down. She didn't need applause or thanks. The truth was enough. Because in the end, silence doesn't mean surrender. It only means someone is waiting for the right moment to speak. And when that moment comes, everything changes. They thought silence meant weakness, but sometimes silence is just the calm before the storm.